Hey everybody, Danielle here, and welcome to today's bonus interview for the Peer Diabetes Mentoring Summit. The bonus interviews are interviews that I've done in the past that I think are highly valuable, but not only did I get an incredible amount of learning and growth and community out of, but I know that everybody else who has watched them in the past has also had that same feeling. I really don't even know where to start to talk about Dr. Stephen Ponder and about the amazing contributions he has made to the diabetes community, both as a person with diabetes, as a pediatric endocrinologist, and also with all of the incredible work he does for diabetes camps and things like that. His level of peer support is high up there, and that is what I aspire to be. He is one of my mentors, and he just has such a great positive outlook on helping himself live well with diabetes, but also helping others do the same. And I really hope that you enjoy this bonus interview today. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Diabetes Live and Unleashed, or Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. Today we are really excited to have Dr. Stephen Ponder. I'm going to read you his intro, his bio, which is super impressive, but then we're going to get to know Dr. Stephen Ponder and his story about living with diabetes. So, Dr. Stephen Ponder has been a pediatric endocrinologist since 1987, a certified diabetes educator since 1989, and he has had type 1 diabetes himself since March 1st of 1966. He's been married for 30 years and has 3 grown children, and Dr. Ponder has been directing one of the largest residential diabetes camps in the U.S., which is now in its 34th year. It's called the Texas Lions Camp for Children. He is also the director of the Pediatric Residency Training Program at the Baylor Scott & White Healthcare, and he also is a professor. He has done lots and lots of research, both basic, scientific, and clinical. He is currently authoring a new book called Sugar Surfing that teaches people with diabetes how to more intelligently take advantage of our data, basically our blood sugars, and kind of live in the moment and the flow of our blood sugars. And he also speaks on diabetes topics both nationally and internationally. So thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time. How are you?
Thanks, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Awesome. So let's get right down to it. Why don't you tell us, we always talk about diagnosis, but a lot of times it doesn't go back to 1966. So tell us a little bit about your story of diagnosis and kind of a little bit about the path you traveled to get from there to where you are now.
Well, Danielle, I was diagnosed, as you know, 50 years ago. I was adopted about 6 weeks of age. I was raised by a wonderful family. And around my 9th birthday, I started having the classic symptoms of diabetes. I started going to the bathroom more often, started drinking more water, started to lose a little bit of weight. And my family took me to my pediatrician, a very nice gentleman who diagnosed me with diabetes. Now, I didn't have diabetic ketoacidosis. Nevertheless, I spent 10 days in a children's ward outside of Dallas, Texas, after being initially diagnosed, largely just to, quote, get me in control, do the classic injections into the orange and all the things you've heard other people tell you about over the years, and then take 1 injection per day of insulin, which is what we did at that time. Of course, we took the insulin with a glass syringe, which had to be boiled, with a reusable metal needle, which we used until it got fairly dull. There were no diabetes educators in the 1960s. And so all of our training came from whatever the nurses happened to tell my parents, or whatever book they gave us. And in fact, I still have the books that they gave us, which were the old Joslin patient manuals, which were largely written for adults with diabetes. In fact, you had to have an adult reading level. I didn't understand any of the things that were in it. It was confusing to me. And so all I knew is that once a day, my dad or my mom would get up and prepare that apparatus, give me a shot of Lente insulin, which I took 20 units, and then I would collect some urine samples and use a Clinitest, which was a little test tube. You put a few drops of urine, a few drops of water, drop a little fizzy tablet in there. It would boil, and you get colors on a chart. And so the colors on the chart really didn't have any kind of negative meanings to me. I know that orange meant I had a lot of sugar, and blue was I didn't have a lot of sugar. I was not encumbered with numbers. I didn't have to worry about numbers. I didn't have the judgment of numbers being hung over me. We also did not have hemoglobin A1Cs back then either. It wasn't for another 15 years. So that's how I was diagnosed. And for the next 15 years, in fact, that's what I did. Took 1 injection per day, checked urine tests periodically, My mom kept very clear logs. In fact, we put that in the book, pictures of my first urine logs. And that was life until approximately late 1980.
Yeah. Well, that's just that's incredible. I mean, and just the fact that you're just here teaching us about this and have that background, I always say, is like, even for me, I didn't have the urine testing, but I also didn't have numbers. We had the glucometers when I was diagnosed in 1991, but it was like a color scale, but the scale did have numbers on it. Well, this color meant you were between, 100 and 150, and this number color meant you were between. So it was still not that accuracy, but I mean, yeah, the boiling of the needles and the testing of the urine and the one shot per day. I mean, it's just, to me, it's just amazing how far we've come. And I have so much hope for the technology explosion that's happening right now, that we're going to have so much more ability to, I really don't want to say control, because, nothing is fully 100% controllable, but, to really have better intelligence to take action that's going to give us a longer, healthier, happier life. So yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit? So since you didn't have those numbers kind of looming over your head and things like that, did you struggle with anything, growing up, or what were you struggling with? We all have our own demons.
I'll be honest with you, Daniel. My family was very accepting. As I mentioned, I was adopted. I never felt pressured in any way. But then again, it was a different era. One injection per day, checking urine. There was not much discomfort. Now, what was discomforting were the injections. They were 25 gauge needles. So you're used to 31 gauge. Yeah. They got dull after a while, and they were about 3/4 of an inch long. And one of the other peculiarities of a glass syringe is that it, from time to time, will lock up. And so my dad would prepare the injection. In fact, we saved all of this stuff. I show it to patients a lot. But as you're pushing the plunger down, sometimes there'd be a vapor lock. The plunger would lock mid plunge, and you'd still have 15 units of insulin left, which meant all the jiggling you did to try to correct that still wouldn't fix it. You had to withdraw the needle, hit it a few times, get it to move, and then another injection with the same apparatus. And so that was not a lot of fun. My father gave me my shots. My mom didn't like to do that as much. And when she did, they were a bit uncomfortable, because moms don't want to hurt the kids, and not that dads don't either, but dad was a little bit more, matter of fact. He'd pop the thing in there, and I usually just roll over, because my rear was a little bit easier to hit, and I wouldn't have to, I wouldn't worry about it. I could look the other way. So the anticipation of the injection is always the worst part of it, right? And so he was very good at giving shots, and I always would kind of tell my mom, let dad do it, because she tried to give it my stomach, and it would kind of hurt, when that happened. But in terms of worries, privately, my parents had not been trained to think that I would live a long time, yet they were very good at keeping it to themselves. My mom took the responsibility of working with the food and also helping with the preparation of the injections as well. My dad really did do the shots, and he did a very good job with it. But they shared responsibility, which it wasn't just my mom's job to do, which I always tell parents that all the time. Parents need to share. Mom and dad need to share. It doesn't need to be one parent's responsibility to do all the time. Also, because of the complexity of this, I wasn't giving my own shots relatively early like we do today with pens and even with syringes. And so I relied on my parents to give me shots almost up until the time I went off to college, which was, for me, fine. One shot a day. I didn't have to worry about it. I could do other things. I went to school. I graduated seventh in my high school class, went off to college. And the first time I ever went into DKA, in fact, the only time, was when I went to college, ran out of insulin, not knowing that if you didn't take your shot for a day that you would get in trouble, because that never happened to me when I was a child. And lo and behold, I get very sick. I think it's something I ate when I was a freshman in college. I wound up in the hospital at the university I was attending, and nobody ever taught me what diabetic ketoacidosis was. So a lot of my problems, quite honestly, Danielle, were due to lack of understanding. I knew what the tasks of my care were, but I didn't really understand why I was doing them. I had no concept of what high blood sugar was. I'm sure I ran all of my childhood for 15 years with high blood sugars. My first A1C was 10.8, and that was when I was a medical student in 1980 when I got my first A1C. I never saw an endocrinologist, never, not even a pediatric endocrinologist, much less an adult endocrinologist, until I went to medical school. But that was sort of the era, at least for me back then, in Dallas, Texas. And so, and you might say I was ignorant, and ignorance was bliss in certain ways. And I find that fascinating now because I've had it for 50 years. I have minimal complications, and I had 15 years of what most people would consider terrible control by today's standards.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to touch on there. First thing, I'll just go with the first thing you just said about that is, that was one thing I was really worried about too, because for me, I spent 10 years of my life with an A1C around 14%. And I worried immensely about, what damage did I do to myself? Because, we hear all about these complications. You're going to, you got to get your toe amputated and you're going to get cataracts and retinopathy and this and that and the other thing. But I mean, knock wood, I get my eyes checked every year. My doctor says that he would never know I had diabetes unless I told him, and I have no complications currently, and I've 24 years, and I ran 10 years at a 14 A1C just like you ran. So I like to use that as a positive point, because look, it's like, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to make healthy changes, and you didn't already do too much damage that it can't be, taken care of, or even sometimes reversed, depending on what we're talking about. So, that's a really important point. And I'm glad that, you had that experience to share too. And another thing that I think is so amazing is that you had the wherewithal, or maybe it was just because you had parents that kept stuff, that you still have that stuff, the syringes and the logs. I mean, that's priceless. That's like, to show that, to have that, it's just, I think it's just so, I'm sure it's super valuable to your patients to see, the experience that it used to be versus the experience that it is now. So.
Absolutely. Old pumps, glass syringes. My mom saved everything. And when I was in one of my practices, I had a glass case that we would put all these items up. Old pumps, the first meters, the big, iTone meter that weighs about 5 pounds, it feels like, that you plug into the wall. All my old Autolets from the old Lansing device days, we had a huge drop of blood for that. All the strips, like what you described, you have to put a drop of blood and you have colors on them. 50 years of diabetes gives you a lot of perspective. And I've had diabetes about half as long as, or a little over half as long as insulin has existed to treat it, which is kind of a sobering fact when you think about it. People think insulin's been around a long time, but I've had it for 50 years, and insulin was really made available in the early 1920s. So it's a fascinating experience to think about all the things that I've seen, just like what you've seen in 24 years, that have made such a difference in our lives. Yet we still have to focus on the decisions and the choices we make every day. And that's no different now than it was, quite frankly, 50 years ago or 24 years ago.
Right. So on that note, when was it in medical school when you kind of, because you were saying that kind of ignorance is bliss thing, when did that ignorance turn into knowledge of, and then you realized what had been going on and you learned? So when did that, kind of transition begin to take place for you?
I think that I was I think I was probably in denial in certain ways, even though I didn't go into DKA, like I said, until that one time in college. I was just fairly meticulous about taking injections. I didn't check much in the way of urine tests after I got into college. So basically, I took a shot every day. That was really, as I tell people now, I stayed alive. And when I got into medical school, and I met a wonderful endocrinologist. He's still alive today, and I'll mention his name here. His name is Melvin Prince, or Mel Prince. He spent a lot of time doing research in type 1 and type 2 diabetes, worked with Eli Lilly, and is still a researcher, as I understand. Well, Dr. Prince put me on the path to where I needed to go, along with another physician who was my inspiration in pediatrics, Dr. Luther Travis. But Dr. Prince just looked at me, did my first A1C, found that I did have some background retinopathy in my right eye, referred me to an ophthalmologist who I wound up seeing then for 30 years, and who gave me some laser therapy in one of the eyes. It was that shock of the fact that I actually had a complication. That was my aha moment. And I thought initially, without any perspective, that I'm going to go blind, because that's what I'd heard growing up. People with diabetes go blind. I never thought I'd make it to the year 2000. That was kind of a secret I had in the back of my mind. I never shared with anybody, even my parents. And only later that I mentioned earlier, my parents didn't really think I'd make it that long. And so here I am 50 years later, and it's a much different story right now. But that was my aha moment, was in medical school when I tried to negotiate my way out of going into a multi-dose insulin regimen. I tried to use all of my intellectual skills to say, well, one shot a day should be just enough. Why couldn't I go to Ultralenti, which was the equivalent of Lantus back then, instead of doing the Lente injection that I was taking? Well, after about several weeks of talking back and forth with my doctor and some great diabetes educators at my institution in Galveston, I came around to going to 2 injections per day. That was a huge leap forward. And immediately I started feeling better. I had more energy. I felt better about myself. And I was already in medical school at that time. And so once I started on that path, I couldn't be stopped. I said, if I can do 2 shots a day and feel well, what if I do 3? And what if I start doing a better job? What if I start checking the blood sugars? And it wasn't very long after that, in 1981, that I got an insulin pump. And it was a very primitive early pump that I got on a large MP6 auto syringe pump. This is the one after the Blue Brick pump you've probably heard people talk to you about before. And I was on a pump for the next 30 years. I got off a couple of times for some short breaks, but went on to do tremendous amounts of pumping, all sorts of different types of pumps. And then when I got off the pump, I go back to basal bolus regimens. And right now, I'm actually off my pump. I'm taking a pump holiday. I developed sugar surfing while I was off my pump, and now went back on the pump to prove that you could do it with a pump as well as with shots as well. And so I see a pump as a wonderful tool, but it's not a necessary tool for me. I maintain the same 5% A1C, 5.3% A1C on a pump versus off the pump, either way, because as I teach, it's all up here. It's the choices that you and I both make every day, which are hundreds, that determine the quality of our control. You make excellent choices, and people you've had on this show make excellent choices too. They're role models. I'd like to think I'm able to make that same statement. But yeah, that's what it comes down to, is choices, not the technology. After 50 years of seeing all this technology, what hasn't changed are my choices. That's what I have to do every day. That's what defines our control.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. I couldn't agree with you more. I was saying, I've just been on my pump for just under a year now, and I had great control on the manual daily injections. But like you said, I never did the 1 injection a day. But when I was having such great control, I was kind of injecting like a pump would. Every time I'd eat something, I'd inject, or if my blood sugar was, rising to a certain point that I was not happy with, I would inject. So for me, the pump was more just and also as being very athletic, for me, that was a big choice, was because having the pump and allowing that ability to cut off to suspend the insulin delivery versus when I was taking Lantus shots, there's no suspending of Lantus. That's going to be working no matter whether you want it to or not. So that was also just helpful for me personally. But I agree with you. It's the choices we make, and I was making good choices when I was on manual daily injections, just over a year ago, and I had good A1C then, and the same now. Just getting on the pump hasn't really changed my A1C immensely. It's really just about your own kind of individual lifestyle and what makes you happy and makes you, feel more in control or empowered to make those good decisions that we're talking about. And I think I'm very much like you in that, I didn't always inject like a pump. I went many years where I was very overweight, high A1C, and I would inject when I ate, maybe sometimes I wouldn't, and it was wasn't always like that. So but once I saw, the thing is that if you're always high, if your blood sugars are always high, a lot of us might think that that's just how we have to feel all the time. That's just our level of energy or aliveness, that when we're like, oh, well, I have diabetes, so this is just how I'm going to feel. But like you said, it's once you started taking those 2 injections, you're like, holy crap, I feel so much better. And then you're like, well, what else can I do? How much better can I feel? Because it's always about you get that little taste of that better feeling, and you're like, oh, well, I feel so much better. What else can I do? What else can I do? I'm very much like that as well, even though I wasn't always. So the point is, even if you're not like that now, you can become that way if you so desire, because people change and our choices change and our goals change. So yeah, no, that's a great point. I love it.
Well, some people will ask me, they want to go somewhere or do something to get in control. And I tell people, control is not something I carry around in a bucket that I can dispense to somebody and they can live off of for 3 months. Control is the sum of your decisions. And that's a point I make every day in the office, to new patients, to established patients. Anytime I speak about diabetes, it's about your decisions. For example, Danielle, if your pump became disconnected, or you turned it off for more than 2 or 3 hours, you'd immediately be out of control. And so control is like breathing. It's like your heart beating. It's something that's happening constantly. It's not something you set aside and do later. It's something you're doing right now. And it doesn't have to get in the way of life. And that's what some people try to do, is try to make it something I'll set aside. I'll do that later. I'll do it next week. I'll procrastinate. No, your control is right now. It's what you're doing today. It's what you did 10 minutes ago. It's what you're planning on doing after this interview. That's control, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And it's being flexible with whatever life throws at you. Like, for example, yesterday, I was actually going to post this on Facebook, but while I was at CrossFit, I ripped my pump off. Doing a squat, I had to dump the bar off my back. It rolled down my back and I ripped my pump off. And guess what? I wasn't getting any more insulin, but I never leave the house, or I always have in two places. I have a bottle or a vial of Humalog and some syringes. I always have that with me at all times. So I checked my blood sugar and it was fine. And I got like a tiny little bit of insulin, and then like a quarter unit, however you could measure that out as well you can in a syringe. And then I just went about the rest of the workout. And then when I got home, I put on a new pump. But it's like, you got to be prepared to make those good choices, is my point. It's like, don't leave the house without either a replacement pump site and injection stuff, or don't leave the house without a syringe and a vial of Humalog, because it's not that big to carry. You just have to be prepared so you can make those, positive choices and not let that ruin your day. Because if something like that happens, oh, my whole day is ruined, I got to leave. No, you just have to flexibly roll with the punches, because there's always punches.
You have the right attitude. You absolutely have the best attitude.
Thank you. Well, you have to. I think attitude is, and like you, I think you say as well, your attitude and your outlook about things is just, and this is not just diabetes related, this is life. I mean, and you kind of are, your reality is your attitude towards whatever you're talking about. It's like, if you think everything is crap, everything's probably crap for you. That's just kind of the way it is. And so I felt that way for a long time. And I know both sides of that reality. And I like this side better. I like to be happy. I like to feel good about things and help other people to try to do the same thing. So it's a good thing.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's, if you would be so kind to share with us, what are your top 3 tips? What are Dr. Stephen Ponder's top 3 tips for, those of us out there who, may still be struggling? I know a lot of us people with diabetes out there, we sometimes feel helpless or hopeless, or, feel like things are not so great. What would you say, top 3 tips for them?
Usually when I'm speaking to new patients that are coming to me, at least children and teenagers and some adults, they tell me they take their insulin, their mealtime insulin, at or after when they eat, regardless of what the situation is. And I really try to get most of them to take their insulin before they eat, generally 15 or 20 minutes earlier. And I realize that's a static concept, even though with sugar surfing, it depends on what the blood sugar is and what direction it's moving. It's more dynamic. But even that simple move for anybody who takes insulin, to get the insulin on board ahead of the food, makes a big difference in what happens after the meal, because the A1C is driven by what happens after the meal for most of us. When we get down to that 7% range and we can't bust through down to the 6 or 5% range, what often we find is that there are a lot of rises that are occurring after breakfast, lunch, and dinner that are not being adequately covered. Now, it may come back down before the next meal. So when you check the blood sugar before the next meal, you may be back in a range you're satisfied with. But those after meal rises, or spikes, as a lot of people like to call them, are better dealt with by better timing or synchronizing food and insulin, which also brings me to the second point. That's really becoming a student of things you eat. You've made several comments about that during our interview, that you have a comprehensive knowledge about what you eat, and you're very knowledgeable about nutrition. You need to be a personal scientist of your own to know what the effect of the foods that you eat, what they have on your blood sugars, in order to best match those foods with an insulin dose, whether it's just a single straight up insulin dose, or whether, like with your pump, you give a combination bolus or an extended bolus. Those are decisions or choices that need to be made. And the third tip is going to be checking the blood sugar results 2 to 3 hours later. And I tell people, it's like me teaching you how to hit a golf ball. Say I have you perfectly lined up, your stance is ideal, you strike the ball, yet I never show you where the ball landed. Well, how can I ever make you a good golfer unless you know what the result of your action is? So if you don't check a blood sugar, whether it's with a sensor or whether it's just checking a blood sugar 2 or 3 hours later, you'll never attain the control you're really seeking simply by trying to hit holes in one with an insulin dose and measuring some food, because it's not always going to happen. Even the best golfers may hit the ball perfectly well, don't hit holes in one. So why should we expect people with diabetes to just measure a dose of insulin based on some algorithm, weigh and measure the food, even take it properly before the meal, and expect to just hit nothing but net or a hole in one?
Right. Those are fantastic tips. And I don't think anybody that I've interviewed so far has given such such specifically actionable tips. I mean, then that I love actionable tips, things that you can literally do right now, do today. And I have to say, from a personal experience, and what you were talking about, some people call it pre-bolusing for your meal. And I had an issue with that mentally or emotionally, before, sometimes like, oh, well, what if, because some people are forgetful, they forget. And I always tell, sometimes if I'm seeing a client and I say, you have to set an alarm then. We have alarms for our phone for every single thing that really isn't even that important. You can set an alarm for 20 minutes. The only time that I'm a little apprehensive about pre-bolusing is occasionally when I go out to eat, depending on, if I order something and maybe I don't like it, or maybe it's not what I expect it to be, and then I'm not going to eat it. But 99% of the time, 20 minutes or so before I eat, I make sure I pre-bolus, and that has made a gigantic difference for me personally I would say within the past year of my life even. So I love that. I love that tip, and I think it's really important that we kind of all realize, like you said, the post-meal spikes are the things that can really keep us back from having the A1C that we kind of desire. So that's awesome. So much good stuff. So tell us a little bit about your sugar surfing book and any other projects that you might be working on right now that you'd like to share with us.
Definitely. Let me give you a couple more tips based on what you just said. When you go out to eat, Danielle, and you may not know when the food's going to get there. I've been in the same place, and I always, of course, have the carbs with me, like you probably have juice or supposed to have, just in case the kitchen breaks down and you do something. You'll make sure there's bread on the table or some sort of carbohydrate source. But even if that's not the case, and say you invited me over to your home and I had dinner and I had to take my injection because I didn't know what you had on the plate, I would probably sit down and chat with you for about 10 or 15 minutes while my insulin worked after I saw what was there. Now, kids may not have that opportunity, but they have 20 minutes for lunch. So you just may have to bite that one and just take the shot and eat. The other thing is you can rearrange the order of the foods you eat. You can eat the carbohydrates last. Just like if you're low going into the meal, intuitively you're going to eat the carbs first, right? Especially the fast-acting carbs, if there are any out there to be eaten. So the order in which you eat becomes a tool when you think about it. Delaying. I was at a conference this weekend. I got there. I didn't know what the food was. I took my shot and I sat there and chatted with my table mates. And I killed about 10 or 15 minutes, long enough for my insulin at least to get on board to follow up with the meal that I was going to eat. I was not in any rush. There was no hurry. And maybe when you're going out dining in the city, you have that luxury of time on your side. So you can find other ways to buy yourself some time to allow time for your insulin to work. I use the metaphor of a quarterback throwing a ball to the wide receiver. You have to let the receiver go downfield a bit, in other words, the insulin, before you throw the football, which is the food, at it. And so you get better synchrony that way. Now I'll shift gears back to what you asked me earlier, and that's the book, Sugar Surfing. I have a draft copy of the book right here. This is what it looks like, just so you know.
Awesome.
Sugar Surfing is written by myself and my co-author, Kevin McMahon. It's about to be published in the next week or so. In fact, we're getting our second proof right now. And after that, we've already pre-ordered over 1,000 books have been pre-sold before this came out, from across the world, from China to South Africa to all points in between, largely because of social media awareness of this topic. This outlines all the concepts of what I call dynamic diabetes control. What we are taught, what I was taught, and what I even teach now as a physician is to teach people static rules, algorithms, certain rigid ways of behavior, which certainly get you a certain distance, but there's more than that. Dynamic diabetes management is managing it in the moment using frequent blood sugar management or possibly a CGM. CGMs make it a lot easier because you can see the directionality of blood sugars. I'll give you a classic example of how this comes into play. My blood sugar the other day was 114, but it was 114 going up at about a 45-degree angle. Now, in that scenario, because I had known from prior practice that it was going to continue to go up based on what I'd eaten earlier and the insulin I'd taken, I wasn't going to wait until it went up to 200 before I acted. I actually took a dose to preempt further rise. So it just went up to about 140 and then turned and came back down. Now, had that 114 been traveling at a steady level trend line, I probably wouldn't have done anything. And if it had been dropping across 114, then I would have probably watched it go a little bit further. And if it didn't level out before it went under 90, I probably would have taken some carbohydrates to prevent a low blood sugar from occurring. But that example there points out three different scenarios with the same exact blood sugar that would involve either eating, taking insulin, or doing nothing. And that's at 114, which most people would say was a wonderful blood sugar to maintain, because blood sugars are not static. They're constantly moving. They're always moving up and down, shifting up and down in everybody, not just with diabetes. A person without diabetes can be on a CGM device and see all sorts of ups and downs in their blood sugars. I've just learned, and what sugar surfing describes is how to maintain those blood sugars in a normal range, or actually, quite frankly, sometimes better than normal range. I've compared my sugar surfing results for 24 hours against a non-diabetic person, my daughter, and my readings are tighter than her normal reading. But it requires time and attention. You have to weave it into your daily routine. You have to glance at the receiver to kind of look at the readings. And I look at my sensor about 40 to 50 times a day. And I just glance at it. It's like you driving your car, looking at your dashboard. You look at it probably about 15 or 20 times every hour, see where you're at. And you're using that to process information to make decisions about what you're going to do next. I do nothing different. I just do it with diabetes. I just glance at my receiver. Yet sugar surfing is a compilation of various skills and techniques and methods to capitalize on that information in a way that's never been taught before. That's what sugar surfing is all about. Dynamic diabetes management.
And you know what? I cannot wait for it to come out. I'm thrilled that it's coming out, because what you teach is kind of what I already do. And this is, self-taught. I'm not a doctor, nutrition is my background, but this is what I've learned to do. And, when I first got my CGM, I've had it for under 2 years at this point, but I look at it all the time. And it's not because I'm obsessed or anything. It's because, like you said, I want to maintain a baseline. I want to know where I am, where I'm going, and if I need to take action. And I kind of explain, my business is called Diabetes Dominators. Like, you can't dominate anything if you have no baseline on it. If you don't know, where you're at, how can you make the decision on what you need to do next? You have to have that information. And, you kind of have to think about it as not as something you have to do, but now it's something we get to do. It's like, this is a privilege. Like, this is like a privilege to have this information at our fingertips, in my opinion. And I can't wait for your book to come out, because that way, kind of the way that you're teaching, and, I know that this hasn't been taught before. And this is something that I think the world of diabetes really needs, is like a fresh, really actionable outlook on what not just kind of like a heady, maybe this, this is exactly what you need to do, this, and this, and it's a step-by-step kind of like 3 actions that you can take for a 114. Here's what they are. It's awesome. I mean, it's really great. And
well, let me tell you, this is right now in just real time, 85, and I'm doing fine. I'm actually doing this over lunch, and I've not eaten lunch. And so my basal rate is set properly, and that's discussed in the book. My basal insulin, which is Lantus in this case, is working just fine. So if I omit food, I don't drift down, I don't drift up, I stay steady. I use the forces of insulin and food to shift this line, move it up and down in a way that best suits my needs.
That's
and excellent. I use the word manipulation actually in a very positive light. Most people use it in a negative tone. But I manipulate my blood sugar direction, my line, if you will. And sugar surfing teaches you how to do that, teaches you how to do it for you. There is no algorithm for this. There really isn't. It's teaching you the principles so you can discover your own unique response to this. And one chapter, the whole book is dedicated to dispelling the false idols of diabetes care. I posted this recently, the entire 5th chapter. But anything from the meter, even the sensor has some variability in it. Insulin, our foods, our activities, our hormones, everything creates variance in our blood sugars and what they do. But at least with frequent monitoring or with a CGM, you can watch these things happen, and you can make preemptive decisions. You can make timing decisions, like I said earlier about the tips. And it's all towards one thing, is to normalize the track of your blood sugars. My last A1C on Monday was 5.3%. I've had 5% A1Cs the last 2 years since I created sugar surfing, and I decided, based on the response I was getting online, put all the Facebook posts I'd created for this, they wanted to put it in the book. And so I said, fine, if I can get the crowd to support it. So we did a crowdsourcing campaign, and that's what gave rise to the creation of the book. It was never, quite frankly, my intent to write a book about this. I had no intention to write any books, yet this was so compelling. And rather than having people fish through Facebook posts that are 5 months old and find them, I put it all in one place. Me and my co-author put it all in one place for everybody to see, and we'll build on this. There'll be more to come. We'll have an ebook version at some point. We'll have an app that'll come from this. But first things first. First thing is to get the book out there, get it in people's hands, let them read it, let them take elements of it, and they can apply it for children. They can apply it for teenagers, for adults, for infants. I have toddlers whose parents are sugar surfing.
Yep.
So there's no age limit. It's type 1. It could, in theory, be type 2 as well. You and I focus on type 1 issues, but it's just learning how to manage blood sugar directions with frequent feedback. That's it.
Yeah, no, yeah, this is exactly what the world needs. And that just goes to prove, you were just posting on Facebook, but they wanted to put into a book, and that's, the market has spoken, and I'm actually getting ready to gear up for a Kickstarter campaign myself. I wrote a book almost 2 years ago at this point, and now I want to do more. There is some how-to, but it's also inspiration and kind of like role model type stuff as well. But yeah, it's like people need this, and not only they need it, they want it, and they've spoken. Social media is a wonderful platform to have, people out there across like you said, the world, China and wherever else. Everybody, diabetes is everywhere. We're not just here in the United States with diabetes. There's every country in the entire world is affected by diabetes. So I can't wait for your book to come out. And I was going to say, I'm sitting here on the same time, real time, and here's mine, and I haven't eaten lunch yet either. But mine, like you said, like I'm just kind of sitting there at 1:05, but when I go to eat lunch, it's going to change. And if I don't eat, that probably won't move. But this is a very similar thing, and to me, this is a breath of fresh air, because a lot of times I feel like I'm the only one out here saying this kind of stuff, and sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy because I'm not a doctor. I don't have an medical degree to say this is what you should do. This is just what I've done and what I've had clients have lots of success with in the past. Proven. That's kind of science. You keep proving it over and over and over again, and it kind of becomes a truth. So I can't wait to have your book out there and say, look, Dr. Ponder, he says it's true, so get it together. So now,
disease, and I tell this to people all the time, that diabetes is a self-managed disease, and that's frustrating, I guess, to some physicians. And I'm a physician, but I'll tell people at the very first meeting, I don't take care of anybody's diabetes. I can't make the hundreds of decisions you make every day. I mean, there was a study done a few years ago that counted the average number of food choices the non-diabetic person makes. 221 choices are made every day by the non-diabetic individual about food alone, much less if insulin dosages, meter readings, and all the other things you have to do in life. So your life is constantly one of decisions and choices and weighing and measuring things, so to speak, in your mind. And your control is the outcome of all that. So why not look at it for what it really is and make the best choices possible that are uniquely applicable to you? And that's what sugar surfing is all about. For you to find your own way. I don't know what your needs are any more than you know mine, but you can teach yourself, and you have done that. You've done a natural sugar surfing approach. Have taught you what your body needs and what you need to do in advance to prevent that line from moving around too much and maintain a tight level of control near normal or at a normal level of glycemic control, what it looks like to me that you're maintaining right now.
Great. And then that's the thing, it's what you said, there's no algorithm for it. Basically, it's like there's no algorithm for individuality. Like there's just not, so this is perfect. And I love it. And just for everybody out there watching, don't worry, I'm going to post any and all links that Dr. Ponder gives me, to be able to pre-order his book if that's possible, or, like him and follow him and all this other stuff, websites. I'm going to post all that under the YouTube video. So don't, scramble and worry about you can't find it, because I'm going to provide all that for you. And so before we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this? Any other wisdom you'd like to give to us today?
Daniel, I think that more and more people, children and adults, are being diagnosed with diabetes of all types. In my career, I'm seeing that increasing in frequency, especially in younger kids. I think our biggest challenge is making sure we support people. We give them a positive can-do attitude. My Facebook page, The Power Within, is based on the metaphor of the Wizard of Oz, which was that Dorothy always had the power to return home, and she had to learn it for herself through her journey. I'm just like you. I'm trying to unlock people's power within. Everyone's capable, in my opinion, of managing their type 1 diabetes. They need support. They need teamwork. They need understanding, and they need some information, but they don't just need prescriptions all the time. I know that keeps us all alive, like it did for me for 15 years. But what we need is to inspire people with blogs like what you're doing, Hopefully sugar surfing will also act as a source of inspiration for certain people. But that's really what we need, because the artificial pancreas, as exciting as that may be, is not going to be available to everybody in the world. And honestly, I would be happy to hand over my spot in the line for an artificial pancreas to anybody else, because I can maintain normal levels of glycemic control. And I do it, I don't want to say effortlessly, but I know how to do it, and I feel comfortable. So any of my patients, my young patients, I gladly give my spot to them to get that, because I have mastered, in my opinion, my diabetes. And I would love to help other people master their diabetes in the way they see fit. And because this is a very individual condition that you and I have, and we have to choose for ourselves how we want to take care of it. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's what you're trying to do. We're warriors in the same battle, and that's what we're here for. We're here to help other people, and that's what I hope this helps. I hope this video helps. I hope that you continue your very honorable work in this field. I wish you much success in your career. And in any way I can help you in the future, please don't hesitate to let me know how.
Well, thank you so much. And really, I couldn't have said any of that better myself. Thank you for, fighting on the same team, fighting this noble fight that we all fight together. And like I was saying, I mean, my Twitter banner is "We're stronger when we stick together." No pun intended. I mean, but pun kind of intended, because it's true. We're just one giant team of people. Yes, it's an individual disease, but we are all fighting for kind of the same outcome, that mastery, that level of feeling like we have that ability to take good care of ourselves. So this has been an amazing interview for me, and I'm so thrilled to have had the chance to talk to you, and I genuinely hope that one day I get to meet you in person. But until that day, we're going to wrap up this episode here, and we will catch you all on the next episode. Take care, guys.